One could consider a few shocking comments and developments in today's gospel. Shocking because when we think of great people other than Jesus, born of woman, the devotional side of us would have a way of saying the Blessed Virgin Mary is perhaps the greatest person born other than Jesus, without sin and the Mother of God. But even Jesus himself would appear to contradict that when he says that there is none greater than John the Baptist. We fit the saints and the Blessed Virgin Mary into the line, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Also, we are a bit perplexed by John the Baptist's question. Our tradition has it that John was so closely connected to Jesus as to be a relative. Whether he was or not, I always answer those questions the same way. I don't know, I wasn't there, but we do know the important role he had in paving the way for the ministry of Jesus as preacher and Messiah. And now he's asking the question, is this really the one we were waiting for? How could John the Baptist ask that question? But Jesus plays off of that himself when he asks them, what was it you went out to see? In other words, it's kind of a collective culmination of all the expectations of the people had for the great liberation that God had in store, and kind of personified in John the Baptist. They had a collective, that's it? Is this it? John perhaps had certain expectations with regard to what this Messiah would be that he was preparing the way for. And perhaps found himself a little disappointed that Jesus wasn't living up to the expectations that he had. And perhaps this gospel itself was written because the author of Matthew recognized in his own community certain expectations people had with regard to the salvation of Jesus that Matthew was preaching, and so many people were taking in as a matter of faith, and then seeing how the church was turning out in the early decades of Christianity. Ostracization, persecution, friends and relatives being arrested and thrown into prison like John the Baptist, some being executed, and perhaps people were asking themselves, is this it? Is this all there is? What about this faith we professed? And so John the Baptist, through the author of Matthew, and the author of Matthew in the person of John the Baptist, perhaps is expressing that. And when you consider it, we at least have the advantage of historical hindsight. We know how things turned out for the church. But put yourselves in the church's place, in the place of Christians in those early decades. A small sect of people who proclaim a deep faith in this Jesus of Nazareth, experiencing these horrendous persecutions, but not knowing how it will turn out. We have the luxury of hindsight. They don't. And so it was perhaps a strong crisis of faith that they were experiencing. And so they were asking, is this it? Is there someone else who's coming? Especially when you have other messiahs coming forth and saying, I am he, let's have an armed rebellion against the Roman occupiers. And so Jesus answers the question that John gives. And just look at what you see. Sure, Jesus may not be the kind of Messiah people were expecting, but look at the fruits of his work. The blind regain their sight, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the good news proclaimed to them. Those who recognize that and aren't distracted by the less than impressive appearance of this man from Nazareth recognize God's work and God's Messiah in that. These extraordinary things that maybe not be getting the publicity or the political results that they were hoping for are nonetheless still indicative that Jesus is the Messiah. And then he plays upon that when he asks, well, what did you go to see in the desert? And you can perhaps hear or feel the people nodding, yeah, he has a point. We were attracted to John the Baptist. What was he? A wild man in the desert. We would say, come and see this great prophet, and people would come out and see a wild man of the desert clothed in camel's hair and say, is that it? This is the prophet we've come to see. And so what it calls on all of us is a patient resolve to focus on the important aspects of our faith. Many people have a grandiose notion of what our faith is about, often forget the basic points of our faith that we're called to recognize. And it's a good gospel to hear during this season of Advent, at this stage of the season of Advent, because we see in our society every year at this time, for better or for worse, a society very much in a hurry, preparing for Christmas, preparing for the proverbial holidays, we like to call it the Christmas season, racing out to get that perfect deal in the shopping season. Many people even, kind of disheartened by the whole idea that they say our society really doesn't have much of a Christmas season, does it? And I always like to contradict that. We do have a Christmas season. They call it the holiday season. We call it the Christmas season. It begins with Thanksgiving and ends with New Year's. It begins with a parade in New York and ends with a parade in Pasadena. It begins with a few football games and ends with a few football games. Football is always going to be worked in there as well. Yes, a time of great commercialism, but also a time of great generosity, which our society is driven by a sense of generosity. We obviously need to get our presents from somewhere, and obviously businesses will benefit from that, from our patronage and from our shopping. But all of it is driven by a sense of generosity. And it is generosity that gives our economy as a nation the annual boost that it gets during this season, every year. Granted, maybe not all the generosity is there. I know my share of families and family members where once Christmas is done, the presents are open, the nieces and nephews or cousins take their kids and go home, and you always find a few presents that the kids opened and left behind, because those weren't the presents they wanted. Of course, the days after Christmas, you have the after Christmas sales in which the line to return items you didn't want tend to be a little longer than the items to buy the things you do. But for the majority of people, there is also a sense of gratitude that comes from generosity, the generosity of others. And blessed are those who recognize that in a Christmas season that, yes, our society does have. And let's not lose that in these last few days leading to Christmas. When we do exchange gifts, we come together as families and friends. Yes, it's very commercial, and that's what drives our economy, and that's what helps keep people with their jobs. That's what puts food on the tables of families who depend on such a boost, and that generosity gives a great boost to the economy of the nation. But alongside that, we have our celebrations as Catholics. After Thanksgiving, of course, people are jumping into the Christmas spirit and with a certain degree of abandon are wishing everybody a Merry Christmas. But we as Catholics know that Advent is a process in which hopefully we aren't lost in what Jesus perhaps might say the stumbling block of the secular Christmas, as good as it is and as good as it can be. But that we begin this Advent, and we're still in that phase now, in which we're looking not to the first coming, but to the second coming. We do perhaps say Merry Christmas with a certain abandon, but there's a certain point in Advent that is coming in just 2 days, December 17th, when we enter into the octave before Christmas, and the readings and prayers in our Mass start focusing not on the second coming, but in preparing to celebrate the first coming, the Incarnation at Christmas. I always like to say, even though we've been wishing one another Merry Christmas with a certain degree of abandon up to now, starting on December 17th, we can now wish each other Merry Christmas with a certain degree of impunity, because now it kind of fits in the process in which we are celebrating Advent. And that process as a people of faith reminds us that in the midst of this busy hustle and bustle of this season, we're called to slow down, take it step by step, as a community of faith, as a family, hopefully in the homes, recognizing that, yes, we don't go straight from Thanksgiving to Christmas. But we as a people of faith go from Thanksgiving to Advent, the first phase of Advent, remembering that our Advent is the second coming. To this Sunday in which we remember Gaudete Sunday, in which we bring on the theme of joy as we wait in joyful hope for the coming of our Savior. A Sunday in which we light the third candle. A Sunday in which the color is, well, we wear this color. Many people call it pink. Let's just say, folks, every year I like to remind you, alpha males do not wear pink. We don't even wear rose. I just think back and figure, what would John Wayne call it? These are salmon-colored vestments. Okay? But we do it out of a sense of joy, and I say this out of a sense of joy and a sense of humor, because we're not a people who come here to pray with a face of misery, but a face of joy. And in just a few days, we take that joy into these last 8 days of Advent as our focus shifts to Christmas, which hopefully for all of us brings us to a sense of slowing down each year during this holy season that's not very long. This year it's only 3.5 weeks among the 4 Sundays. And Jesus tells us in today's gospel, let's not get lost in expectations and the constant hustle and bustle of our world, but to slow down, to not find a stumbling block in what the rest of society is engaged in, even if it is from a deep spirit of generosity and an anticipation of sharing that perfect gift with those we love. But that we also slow down as a people of faith to remember what it is we celebrate. We are rejoicing in the promise that Jesus will come again. And over time, people have waited and waited and waited and waited. 2019 years. And some perhaps are saying, is that it? Is he not coming? Look at what the church has gone through. Look at what the church has done. Look at the trials and struggles that people of faith have been through. Is he coming back? And Jesus again says, blessed are those who find no stumbling block. And that we put our faith in his words. And we remember with joy that we await his coming. And it is in that spirit that in 2 days we enter into the octave of Christmas, in which now we are not focusing on the second, but preparing to celebrate the first, as we wait in joyful hope for the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.